Welcome back. So we are now on part three of our chapter five presentation. First, we looked at, well, what are the reasons why people were pushed out of their places of origin, or what drew them to Canada? The second part, we looked at, well, once they're here, what challenges do they face? And we saw the many types of discrimination. We saw the many types of challenges that they had to encounter when they were here, especially in the prairies. And third, what we're going to look at now is, well, once they were here, what happened and what did they do to get use, and what did they do to be successful in this land of plenty? Let's take a look. So it's still better in Canada. So we talked about the many reasons why they were pushed out: persecution, famine, disease, lack of jobs. So life back in Europe and Asia was still worse than it was in Canada. So even when they got here, I mean, it wasn't all fine and roses. It was tough. And so we talked about, like in our many presentations, what we discussed in classes, the advertisement, the posters for Canada, and the message it was sending was somewhat totally different to the realities of it. Again, the government of Canada had to entice these people, had to get them from their place of origin to the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the Canadian prairies. And so they did whatever they needed to do in most cases. But when people got here, it was challenging, but it was still better than what it was back home. In Canada, they could own their own land. They created these homesteads, these type of homes and these farms where they could be successful. They could send their children to school. Back in Europe or Asia, in many cases, there was no option, there was no possibility of sending their kids to school, meaning their options were limited. You could only go so far if you weren't able to read or write. Your job opportunities were very strict. But now that you're able to go to school, you're able to read, you're able to learn these different skills, now your options for jobs grew immensely. There was no conscription into the military. Well, at least not yet. And so if you want to be part of the military, well, you had to volunteer. You had freedom of religion in Canada, which is still one of our pillars nowadays. Meaning you could worship the God that, or the religion and practice the religion that you want, without fear of being persecuted, without fear of being driven out and discriminated against. And also you had some political rights, meaning you had the right to vote, which to many people, especially over the age of 18 nowadays, they kind of take it for granted. But at least you have a vote. In many of their countries back then, they had no voice, they had no vote, they had no power. So in Canada, they had that. What about farming the land? Well, take a look at this picture. You and your wife, or your husband, and your family had just arrived here. You got off the train. You were told to head north or west or east or south, a couple hours, and you get here. Here's your land. What do? Do you start plowing? Is there lots of trees around? Is there a lot of shelter? Not so much. And so they had to develop some farming technology and these things called cooperatives in order to be successful. And so if you get a chance, open up the Google slide for chapter 5 and you'll see these two videos. And it talks about how farmers work together in order to be successful, especially in the West. Now the video on the left, the threshing machine farmers working together, has a little bit of the US kind of perspective, but it's very similar, the Midwest, to what happened to the Western provinces, the prairies in Canada. And on the right side, we have the John Deere, which is a modern tractor, versus an 1800 steam tractor. Before you watch it, take a guess. Who do you think would win? Modern technology in all its advances, or the old school powered by steam? What do you think? And last but not least, we're going to look at farming cooperatives. Well, what are they? Well, essentially, it's a group of people that cooperate together for a common goal. They work together, hence a cooperative. Do you know of any cooperatives? Are your parents parts of any cooperatives? So you might ask yourself, well, why create and join a cooperative? Well, you can share costs of equipment and supplies. Think back again, the challenges of running a farm and getting a farm started. Well, you need tractors, you need equipment, and that stuff is very expensive. It's a lot more inexpensive if you share those costs with many other farmers. Well, now that you've grown your crops, well, what do you do with it? As a farmer, you're already busy enough as it is. But if you pool all your crops together, then instead of having each person selling their own crop, you have one person selling everyone's crops. And that way, it's a lot easier and logistically much more effective. Cooperatives also became a voice for the Canadian farmer. Imagine most Canadian farmers were separated by kilometers, sometimes hundreds of kilometers to their neighbors, to the nearest town. And so they don't have a strong voice out there. And so if these farmers join these cooperatives, they can make their voice and their thoughts and their opinions heard and known by all, or at least by more people. Being part of a cooperative allowed you to share your knowledge and expertise. Meaning if you were able to grow a plant by a certain method, you could then share that and everyone would be successful. And it also helped start the creation of communities. People were strangers, but now that they're part of cooperatives, they're able to now be able to have these communities and these towns grew, and in some cases, cities. So ask yourself, do you know any modern day cooperatives? I can think of some that I'm part of. Co-op, gas station. It's in their name. Co-op is short for cooperatives. Co-op food stores, the grocery stores. That is a cooperative. Are your parents part of a credit union? Well, those are essentially cooperatives. It's people putting their money together, their resources together, their expertise together for the benefit of the community. And that's all on immigration.